Chapter 1. Seb. Attack on High Road. The wind screamed past me, tugging at my armor and pulling at the goggles on my face as Kalax fell into a dive straight for the bare earth. "Seb!" Thea gasped the word and grabbed the back of my harness. Tension and anxiety thrummed through her body and into mine. "Hold!" I shouted with my mind and voice, leaning low over the long neck of our red dragon. Kalax's excitement, her eagerness for this fight, trickled up through the connection I had with her. But I had to concentrate. We had only one shot, and I had to be sure we didn't miss. The ground grew larger, filling my sight. In a matter of seconds, the straight road that ran north and south, linking Torvald to the rest of the Three Kingdoms, had turned from a faint ochre line to a lane, and I could make out the way markers on either side. The mounted figures beside the burning house looked like large dolls, but they glanced up, and I could see their harsh faces. "Now!" I gripped the pommel and squeezed my thighs tight against the saddle. Kalax roared, unfurling her wings in a sudden snap, catching the wind and sending a beat of air as powerful as a gale down on the bandits below. She roared again, the muscles of her wings and shoulders trembling under the strain of slowing her descent. I knew she could do this tricky maneuver. There were times when we were flying that Kalax and I became one body, one mind in flight. The thunderclap of air swept down on the bandits, startling their horses, sending two men sprawling to the ground and blowing apart bits of burning thatch before they could catch the rest of the structure. The smell of soot and smoke wafted up, as did the screams. "Hiya!" Thea stood up in her stirrups and fired down at the bandits. One arrow hit the side of the building, the other found its mark, and the bandit who was attempting to mount his terrified steed fell. "Up!" I whispered to Kalax. Her excitement and thirst for the hunt bubbled inside me. She could smell the terrified horses and hadn't eaten anything all day except for a skinny old sheep this morning. "Hunt!" The word appeared in my mind, flowing through the warm scales under my hands and blossoming with her accompanying desire for the thrill of the chase. Kalax shared her thoughts more and more with me now, rather than just listening to mine. Commander Hegarty had said it was because we were becoming more attuned to each other, but Merrick and Varla thought it was dragon affinity, an extra strong connection I had with dragons. Given everything that had happened when we'd fought the wild dragons months ago, it made more sense. "No, not yet," I told her. "Wait." Kalax was puzzled and I could sense her disappointment, but she rose into the air and circled. "I've still got another shot!" Thea shouted. I glanced back at her. Some of her golden red hair had come out of her helmet and she scowled as fierce as the bandits. Two of the bandits below were carrying short crossbows and they could fire much quicker than Thea could draw her longbow. As the navigator, it was my duty to choose the lines of attack and escape and to keep both Kalax and Thea out of danger. I didn't want to admit it, but I was afraid for Thea. The memory of her lying on the floor of that cavern, blood seeping from the chest wound as she lay dying, chased a shiver through me. I wasn't going to let that happen again. The bandits below were screaming now, shouting to run even as another of them tried to call the others back. 3 fled on their mounts, headed south and into the wilds. "We'll leave them to the King's patrol," I told Kalax before directing her to circle around in a wide arc to return to the remaining 4. Small black bolts sped past Kalax. One thudded into her scales, causing her to roar. I leaned to the side, wanting her to veer out of the way. The bolt had done her no harm, but I didn't want a lucky shot piercing her wing. My order confused Kalax for a second, making her spin in midair before she turned and headed toward the remaining bandits. Thea shouted a war cry, and a flush of panic doused me in chill sweat. What if they'd had time to reload? But Kalax was fast. She fell on them, her forward claws seizing 2 bandits. She swooped past the half-demolished building and released them into the brambles. They'd be battered and bruised, but otherwise unharmed, and probably happy to give themselves up to anyone. Balancing in her stirrups, Thea shouted down at the bandit who seemed to be the leader. "Halt in the name of the king!" One bandit turned and ran, leaving the biggest man on his own against one of the kingdom's fiercest defenses, dragon riders of Torvald. I wheeled Kalax around, preparing for another swoop. The man threw his sword onto the ground and raised his hands in the air. With a triumphant roar, Kalax skimmed over his head a little lower than was necessary, knocking him flat. I had to grin. We had driven off the bandits, fulfilled our mission, and survived. The king's patrol arrived in time to see Kalax land on the road, flattening the grass with the beat of her wings. I knew they had ridden out from the capital at the same time Commander Hegarty dispatched us, but no horse could match the speed of a dragon, especially not Kalax. She was a crimson red, meaning that some of the old bloodlines had resurfaced. Kalax had a long neck, long tail, and wings big enough to wrap around an entire house. She wasn't as sinuous as the blue dragons, or as strong as the short-necked greens, or as fast as one of the wild blacks, but she had the perfect mix of their best skills. She had barbs that she could flare from around her face and along her tail if she ever needed to, and her teeth were as long as my forearm. At the moment, she was happily preening her thick wing like a bird, obviously happy with the day's work. I swung off Kalax and glanced around. The captain of the patrol was a woman with a square jaw and fair hair scraped back into a thick braid. She wore leather armor, like most riders, but also carried a long sword and had a banner of the Middle Kingdom fixed to her saddle. Her warhorse was large and dark gray, but seemed a little skittish, snorting as if it didn't trust Kalax. Kalax huffed out a warm breath, and the captain had to hang on to her mount. She glanced at me and said, "Captain Lacey, this is the leader, huh?" She nodded to where her men were tying up the last bandit who'd surrendered. Thea unclipped her harness and jumped down. 3 more are fleeing southward. We'll get them, no fear. As for these, they'll be taken back to the city. A year and a day of working in the high pastures, and they'll rethink a career of theft. Thea shook her head, crossed her arms, and faced the bandit. You're lucky. My father, Lord Flamma, would have had you whipped and thrown into chains. I winced at the comment. As much as Thea had changed, sometimes the fact that she was from a noble house still came out at the worst times. Oh, sure, she knew which knives and spoons to use at dinner, or how to address a lord, or a captain, or an ambassador correctly, but she also could say things that would even make the lesser nobles flinch. It was different for me. I'd come from the poorest part of Torvald, and I still wondered at becoming a navigator to Agathea Flamma. There were times I thought I'd wake and find my position as a dragon rider was a dream, or a nightmare, for rumors of the return of an old evil were still as thick on the ground as fallen leaves in autumn. Thea turned away from the bandit, but I kept staring at him. I was no expert on bandits, but this lot didn't look the type to be out for an easy gold mark. Most bandits I'd seen looked a lot like the people I'd grown up with in Monger's Lane, with dirty, patched tunics and cloaks that could hide their faces. They'd pushed through hard times. These fellows looked more like warriors. They could afford crossbows and swords and wore stiffened leather armor dyed red. They also wore their hair in an unfamiliar fashion, with a braid running the length of their scalps and either side shaved. Tattoos covered their arms and necks. "Captain Lacey," I asked, "where would you say these bandits are from?" The captain turned to look at the man and nodded. "From a long way off. The southern reaches, maybe." That was a long way away. The maps I'd seen at the academy had shown the southern reaches were located at the other end of the southern kingdom and weeks away by horseback, days even by dragon. Due to recent troubles, that would also take them through hostile regions. Why come all this way to burn down a few houses? Don't worry, lad. Just bandits. The captain signaled for her men to mount and move off. We'll be sending a team down to deal with those that fled. She threw a quick salute, mounted, and rode off. Thea leaned against Kalax, and I scratched below Kalax's jaw at the spot she liked. Let's allow Kalax to get her breath before we return. Thea nodded, but she stared at the horizon as if she saw something I couldn't make out. She didn't say anything, so I headed over to where the bandits had dropped their weapons. The long sword and the crossbows were all well made. I'd learned enough of blacksmith's work from my father to know when a weapon was a costly piece, and these were worth more than any bandit would have found in this small village. Something didn't feel right. Glancing at the ground, I saw a leather pouch one of the bandits must have dropped. Opening it, I found a shark's tooth, a few gold marks, and a few beads. Keepsakes of a life on the road? Hey! Thea walked up to me. What are you doing? Look at these. I showed her the items from the pouch. A shark's tooth means from the sea, or the coast at the very least. She shrugged. So, it's not where they came from that matters. It's that we managed to stop them looting and burning in, 2 minutes? Come on, Seb, we've rested enough. And you're looking for more trouble where there's none to be found. She headed back to Kalax, and I put the items back in the pouch and left it by the half-ruined house. The truth was, I feared trouble would find us before we were ready to be found. We had defeated the man who was referred to as Lord Vincent once, but it hadn't been a full victory. Lives were lost, including both humans and dragons. During all the chaos, Lord Vincent managed to escape, and sightings of the Darkening, of villages where everyone forgot their lives and simply disappeared, continued to surface. That meant both Lord Vincent and the Darkening were still out there, regrouping to come at us again. And we had no real idea how to defeat either of them, or even if we could.